Colonel Mayo is an architect and an original implementer of the Special Operations Village Stability and Afghan Local Police Program in Afghanistan. He authored the authoritative VSO, Village Stability Operations Methodology document known as VSO 101 in the SOCOM Donovan Report. He also wrote the only strategic narrative document to state on VSO in Afghanistan for Small Worlds Journal. From 2010 to 2011, Colonel single-handedly designed and implemented all 4 stations of USS SOCOM. That's the United States Special Operations Command, the Joint SOF, the Special Operating Forces. Academic week, which trained 4,000 Special Operating Forces in Afghanistan bound personnel. This training was highlighted in Linda Robinson's highly acclaimed book, 100 Victories. His specialties include complex stability operations, collaboration across organizational networks, and full-spectrum training in stability tradecraft. He currently advises senior Special Operating Forces commanders in Afghanistan and the U.S. and federal law enforcement on bottom-up operations in outlying communities. Colonel has guest lectured at prestigious colleges such as UPenn and Wharton's, and is a military analyst for MSNBC, Fox News Radio, and has authored 3 books. Since retirement, Colonel has founded and is the Chief Executive Officer of Stability Institute, a nonprofit organization dedicated to brokering knowledge and connecting stability professionals on complex stability issues around the globe. He is also a real estate entrepreneur and founder and CEO of Patriot Families, a nonprofit organization committed to helping military families and wounded veterans at grassroots level. It is my honor to introduce you to Colonel Scott Merriman.
When I was 14 years old, I was hanging out with my buddies at Harold's Soda Shop in this little one-horse town of Mount Ida, Arkansas. And this guy walked in. He had on this polyester uniform that had no wrinkles in it. I mean, it looked like cardboard. And he had these boots that came all the way up to his knees. And they were so shiny that I could see myself in the toe of those boots as he walked in. And he had all these colored ribbons across his chest. It looked like a fruit salad. And he had this funny-looking green hat on his head that he took off as he walked in the room. And as he came in, he didn't strut, he didn't swagger. He just kind of sauntered in. And nobody moved. And as I watched that guy move across the room, I said to myself, that's me right there. That's me. That's what I'm going to be. And then everybody around me started dying laughing. And I realized, oh my goodness, I just said that out loud. Because instead of looking like Johnny Rambo or John Wayne, I look more like Johnny Appleseed. Weighing in at a whopping 105 soaking wet. That must have been a pretty funny thing for my buddies to hear, that I wanted to be like this dude that just walked in the soda shop. But you know, I didn't hear it. For the first time in my life, I didn't hear any of that. Even though it was the same laughter I'd heard as a socially awkward kid trying out for football, trying out for basketball, trying to fit in as we moved from town to town. I didn't hear it this time, because all I saw in that dude was what I wanted to be right there. That was it. So I just got up and walked over to him. And he was a big dude. I walked up, tugged on his tunic. Excuse me, who are you? What do you do? Kind of looked down at me. My name's Mark. I'm Billy's older brother. I'm home on leave. I'm a Green Beret. Come over here, man. Sit down. I'll tell you about it. So I sat down with Mark, and he proceeded to tell me all about U.S. Army Special Forces, the Green Berets. Now imagine this 14-year-old kid talking to this guy about Green Berets. I was hooked. I mean, he had me hook, line, and sinker. He had successfully recruited this young kid. And when I went home that night, physically, spiritually, mentally, I was already a Green Beret. I went straight to our bookshelf, because we didn't have computers at home then. grabbed the Encyclopedia Britannica under S and started looking up Special Forces. The first thing I did was I learned that out of 1.4 million people in the U.S. military, only 6,500 make it into Special Forces. So the odds weren't real good. If you were to look to your left and your right, that means everybody to your left and your right, the person to your left and right wouldn't make it. We thin the herd pretty quick. The next thing I learned was I wanted to know that I heard all this about the Navy SEALs. What was the difference between the Navy SEALs and the Green Berets? And I saw that the Navy SEALs go in on targets, take a target down, and then come out. Green Berets go in behind enemy lines and stay behind enemy lines for long periods of time, sometimes years. They immerse into the culture. They grow their beards, speak the language, establish deep relationships with people at a community level, and then help them stand up against whatever threats they're facing. So they help the little guy stand up for the big guy. I was hooked. That was definitely what I wanted to do. So I spent the next 10 years of my life training and preparing to become a Green Beret, even before I went in the Army. When all my buddies were out training and lifting to go to make the football team or to make the basketball team, my little skinny rear end was hauling a rucksack down the logging roads of Mount Ida, Arkansas, trying to get ready to try out. And finally, when I was able to go in the Army, I went to every school I could possibly go to start on my path to become a Green Beret, and failed every single one of them. Because I was still that scrawny kid. Was in Ranger School. Within 5 days. They take away your food in Ranger School. You eat about once every day, every other day. You sleep about 30 minutes a night, and they inject stress in your life to see how you lead under those conditions, and they're very good at that. Within 5 days, they had brought me into the Ranger School orderly room, and they said, "Ranger man, sorry, you didn't make the cut. We're going to have to send you home." I said, "Hold on a second, you mean send me home? This is all I got. This is what I do. This is me. I can't go home." And they said, "Sorry, you didn't make the standards. You've got to go." I said, "Well, I got my duffel bag here. Just give me another class, and I'll just wait. Right? I'll just wait until the next class comes." They said, "You don't understand. Thanksgiving's next week. The next class isn't for 7 weeks." So that's fine. Just which bunk? They looked at each other, clearly acknowledging that the skinny kid in front of them was crazy. And said, "Okay, fine. Go to Building Alpha 2. And we're going to work you until the next school starts." And that's exactly what they did. I went there, sat my bunk down, and for the next 7 weeks, mowed grass, painted buildings, waited for the next class to start. On the day that my original class graduated and they were getting their Ranger tabs, I was pulling weeds out of the parade field, watching them walk across. But I didn't quit. I stayed with it and finally made it through. One school after the other. I'd fail it, I'd go back. I'd fail it, I'd go back. Until one day in October 1996, on a stage about like this, actually a little bigger, in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Fort Bragg, I had on this polyester uniform. Didn't have a wrinkle in it. And my boots were so shiny I could see myself in them as I looked down. And I even had a little fruit salad with ribbons across here. And I had something else. Something that had taken me 10 years to earn. And I wore this funny green hat for the next 18 years of my life. I wore it to Colombia, to Peru, to Iraq, to Afghanistan, over and over. What I didn't realize was that wearing this hat comes at a cost. 43 of my friends were killed. Men like Pedro Munoz, Charlie Robinson. I said goodbye to my wife and boys at the airport more times than I can even count. I missed birthdays, anniversaries. I can remember one time having to peel my youngest son off of my leg because he couldn't let go at the airport. But I'll tell you something, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I would do it all over again. I would run all those miles again and endure all of that again, because in that crucible of conflict and struggle, I learned what human beings are really all about. I learned how to lead in situations that seemed impossible. And I gained a perspective on how the world really works from a very human community level. Because in all the places that I deployed to, we immersed in the culture. We worked with the locals. And I was able to see things from that perspective. And that's what I hope to share with you today. That's what I want to share with you for the few minutes that we have together. Ms. Kleintop asked me to come and talk to you about violent extremism, specifically Islamist violent extremism. And this is a topic that we literally, and we could spend days on talking about. It is a very deep, complex topic. And I don't want to even try to go there with you. What I want to try to do is to give you a little bit different perspective on this problem. To give you a little different way to look at this problem so that it can inform your thinking. Because as I've met most of you this morning, it's clear that you're on your path to becoming leaders at different levels. And one of the keys to being a leader is to looking at the problem as holistically as you possibly can. So that's what we're going to do here. So this is the book I have coming out in a couple of months called Game Changers. And here's the bottom line, is for the first decade of the war in Afghanistan, all of us Green Berets, we kind of got it wrong. Most of the military, we kind of got it wrong. What we ended up doing was going into Afghanistan very angry after 9/11 with the sole intent of getting payback, of avenging the loss of our fallen, including one of my best friends who was killed in the Pentagon on the first day. And so we moved into Afghanistan and we started immediately hunting the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And we did this for almost a decade, and we got a lot of them. But what happened was, in about 2009, we looked around and we realized that a lot of what we were doing wasn't working. In fact, there were more Taliban almost than when we started. They were controlling more territory than when we started. So we recognized that something in this war on terror wasn't working. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. These are the lessons that we learned the hard way, and that you're going to inherit. Because whether you accept it or not, whether we choose to accept it or not, Islamist violent extremism is still the greatest threat that faces our nation today. It's the most immediate, pressing threat. Now, that's one man's opinion, but it's someone who looks at daily threat briefings, who has been assessing and looking at all the threats facing our country for decades now, over 2 decades. And that's my assessment. And I would tell that to anyone. Is that this is the highest threat that we face as a nation. Islamist violent extremism, to quickly define it, is the projection. Notice I didn't say Islam is the greatest threat. It's Islamist violent extremism. The projection of violence of a radical, when people fail to believe or subscribe to a radical ideology. You project violence upon those people when they don't subscribe to that. For example, what you saw with the Jordanian Air Force pilot that came on the news yesterday. Those are the kinds of acts of Islamist violent extremists. And they are absolutely the greatest threat that we face. And you're going to see it. You're going to inherit this on your watch. It's not going away anytime soon. It's evolving and growing. My assessment is also that we're losing. We're not winning this fight. And it's something that if we do lose, it poses tremendous strategic risk to the nation. Because the reason is, where these guys go to set up shop, where they go to project terror from, those places, we have to stabilize those places. We have to take that terrain away from them. And these are rough, rough places. Places like Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, East Africa. Really rough places that frankly we don't understand. But that's where they go to set up shop, and it's where their safe havens are. We have to recognize those threats and change the game for you guys and your kids to be safe at home. Now, what the violent extremists are doing, here's the bottom line. Here's how they are taking the model that they used in Afghanistan to attack us on 9/11, and they're exporting the same model over and over again to other rough places. And I'm going to try to break this down for you and show you essentially how they do it. What they look for are countries with fragile governments and what we call autonomous clan society. And I'll explain the difference to you in a minute. But think of a place like Afghanistan, where the government is clearly very weak. It's not able to project its power very far at all. In fact, we have a saying in Afghanistan that once you step off the pavement, you step into a completely different world. It's a tribal world. Rule of the clan. Anybody play Clash of Clans? There it is. All right? That's what you normally see when you get off the pavement in these rough places. That's what they look for. They look for a blend of a fragile government that can't project its reach very far, and the rest of the country or the rest of the area dominated by tribal society. So, what it kind of looks like, I'll have a little fun with my own Green Berets here. So, that's an SF guy. You can always tell because he's got the hat backwards and he's got the Oakleys on. And this is a Pashtun tribesman on the left. How do you think this conversation is going? Yeah, it's not going real well, right? That's kind of what that guy's thinking. Completely different planets. And this, I saw this over and over again in Afghanistan, where we had literally these clash of civilizations as we went into these areas trying to work these problems. This was normally what you saw. And there's a reason for it. There's a very distinct reason for it. The difference between this guy and this guy is way more than religion. Way more than religion. Even more than culture. It's a societal difference that we have to understand. There's two societies in this world. And I'd ask you to please dial into this one because it's really important. There's two societies in the world that we live in. There's a society of status and there's a society of contract. Society of status. Think about it like we all come from hunters and gatherers, right? I mean, we all come from that place, from the nomads that moved around the earth and hunted and gathered, and they operated in groups and clans. And over time, some of those groups became sedentary, and they started to farm. And then they became industrial, and then even moved into the information age. As those periods of time occurred, society changed. And the expectations and norms of society changed. But some of them did not change. Some of them remained very close to their origin. This society of status and this society of contract is how that manifested. So in a society of status like Afghanistan, where this guy comes from, everything revolves around the clan. Everything revolves around his family, his group, his tribe, his quam. Right? Over here, everything revolves around the individual. What's the governing document that makes America extremely unique in the world? All right, which focuses on what? The people, but what else does it focus on? The rights of the what? Of the individual, right? Their individual rights and liberties. That is actually a pretty phenomenal thing. It's a fairly novel concept. This notion of the individual. Because all of the places that we come from in the world are clan-based. Why do you think people form in groups in a place like Afghanistan or Iraq? Why do you think that is? What? Safety. What else? Survival. What else? How do they get most of their food? Farming. You ever try to farm by yourself? It's not easy, is it? All right? The group, the clan, it has utility. It serves a purpose. And so your status in society, this guy's status in society is directly dependent on where he is positioned in his clan. So, let me ask you a question. If this little fella's being dressed down by this guy in front of his clan, what do you think he's thinking about right now? If he's being embarrassed in front of his entire clan, what's going through his mind right now in terms of his status? That's a problem, right? Because honor and shame is the currency in this kind of society. Honor and shame is everything. Your survival is tied as a clan to your honor and to your shame. Your honor, your standing in the community is extremely important. And so when we operate, even just from a fundamental perspective, a lot of times we don't recognize the difference between how we view the individual and they view the group. Right out of the gate, it's a major problem. Hospitality, how we think about hospitality, how they think about hospitality. In a place like Afghanistan or Iraq or an honor-based society, they will give you their last piece of meat in order to demonstrate publicly that they're capable of hospitality. because it elevates their standing within the group. It doesn't happen a lot in America. It's a major difference. It's a major, major difference in these two societies. If this guy's honor is encroached upon and he loses face publicly, he is honor bound to pursue revenge. He has to. It's not even a choice. If you go into a man's house in Afghanistan at night and raid it and bring everybody out and flex cuff them and take them off, the man of that house is honor bound to pursue revenge in order to maintain his status in the community. It has nothing to do with ideology. It has everything to do with honor. In our society, if someone offends your honor, let's say something happens at school, right? Someone says something to you, someone does something publicly that embarrasses you. And is your honor hurt? Yes or no? Yeah. So you can just go right out there in the parking lot and take them out, right? Of course not. Of course not. This is a rule of law society. That's vigilante justice. It's not allowed. The state handles those things. Even if your honor is affronted or encroached upon, the state will handle that, if it's even a violation of the law. But in Afghanistan, or a place where clan society is actually more prevalent than the government, hey, you got to handle this. You have to handle this. Your family is counting on you to handle this. And if you won't handle it, they will. Hatfields and McCoys, anyone? This kind of feud is all over the world. Clan-based feuds, very common. All right? But it's actually at the epicenter of a lot of your violent extremism that's going on in the world. A lot of the stuff that you see going on is based on feud. But there's all these elements of this society that we just don't really understand. And that's what's actually being mobilized by violent extremists to project against us. In America, in a transactional society, we think about logic. How many times have you heard, hey man, it's just business. It's just business. It's just how we do business around here, right? We're a very logic-based society. In clan society, it's all about how you feel. It's all about emotion. How long do you think a feud lasts in Afghanistan? Try centuries. The Ghilzai and Durrani confederations have been feuding for 211 years. And we've played right into it. So feud is a very, very powerful thing in these honor-based societies, and it's being mobilized against us. All right? So I just want you to know at kind of a fundamental level, I told you I would come in at the grassroots. This is what's going on. In the communities and the farming villages where we've worked all over the world, this is reality. You worry more about how you feel about something. Story. If you can't tell a story in this part of the world, you're not relevant. If you can't communicate through story what's going on, you're not relevant. If you try to throw up a PowerPoint slide and talking points, you're going to get laughed out of the village. They don't even know what that is. So these are very, very different societies. In Papua New Guinea, this guy was driving a truck in an urban area. He runs over this kid. Didn't mean to do it. Kid runs out in front of him. It's kind of a tribal area. Kills the kid. What do you think the kid's uncles and brothers start doing immediately? They start preparing for revenge, for feud, because they're honor-bound to do that. The guy's boss, recognizing what's happening, coming from tribal society, he actually calls the kid's father. He says, listen, I'd really like to pay for the funeral. I'd like to come to the funeral if it's okay. The guy says, sure, absolutely. So he comes to the funeral. He sits down in front of the father. All the simmering uncles are behind him, arms crossed, ready to get it on. And the guy says, listen, he sits down a sack full of cash. He says, this can in no way atone for the loss of your child. But I hope in some way it will allow us to have our relationship and move forward. What do you think the dad said? No, he said, absolutely. All forgiven. Because it is a restorative society. They don't worry about punitive justice. The relationship is what matters. He atoned for the wrong publicly. He said, I'm sorry. He atoned for it in blood money. The relationship is repaired. Move on. That's a major difference than our society, right? I mean, if you did that in our society, oh, no, we're good, man. I gave you some money. It's all good. No. Somebody's got to pay for this. There's got to be justice. But these are fundamental differences in our worlds. That's how different these two societies are, and it's important that we understand that. A lot of the places in the world where violent extremists set up shop, they exploit the trust gaps between the government and their people. Remember that these major differences in how we see the world at a clan level versus a government level, they go in and they take advantage of that. And they basically set up shop using that to their advantage. Because the bottom line is, most of these communities in the world that I'm telling you about, they usually kind of handled their own affairs. Even in Afghanistan, from like 1920 to 1970, they handled everything at the tribal level. They very seldom had any interaction with the Afghan government. Same in Iraq. They were very independent. Tribes and clans function on their own. It's not the way we would do it necessarily here in America, but it works. Well, those societies today are damaged big time. All right? So they can't handle a lot of their own affairs that they used to handle. Whether it's potable water, whether it's growing their own food, whether it's resolving disputes, those capabilities are degraded. So when you see a place like Afghanistan on the news, or Yemen, or places in Africa, their ability to handle their own problems at a community level, almost non-existent. Almost non-existent. But guess what's still there? Clan honor. That's still there. And imagine all those young men and young women who can no longer really contribute to society. There's no jobs. Agriculture is degraded. There's no way to really gain status in local communities except what? Jihad. Or to move out and atone for your honor somewhere else. And they play to that every time. Gangs do the exact same thing here in America. They take advantage of our communities being degraded, and that's what they go in and they do. They exploit that honor that's still there. The other thing to understand about Islamist violent extremists is that they have in their mind a visual image of a global caliphate. There was a time in history when Islam controlled a large chunk of Europe and Africa and the Middle East. They want to restore that even broader in many ways. And this goal for the global caliphate is what's driving it. All right, so they've got a motivation that runs extremely deep. They understand that people all around the world respond to that. What the violent extremists say to folks is they say, listen, Islam has been under attack for centuries. The West, America, other allied countries, they are attacking Islam. They're coming after it. And they're coming after you and your way of life. And it's your duty to stand up against it. And that is a very, very powerful narrative. Even in the most rural community around the world, it unifies villages and communities around that concept. And if you think about the fact, mostly what we do in response to things like these terror attacks, what do? Drone strikes, bombing raids, midnight special ops raids, right? It plays right into that narrative. It drives the extremists deeper and deeper into the populations where they operate. It's a very, very powerful concept, and it's a real problem for us going into the 21st century. One of my favorite cartoons. Yes.
Just to let you know, time frame, we have about 15 minutes.
All right. What I'm going to do there is, appreciate it, Terry. I'm going to go ahead and stop here because what I want to try to do, I'm going to advance to 3 things that I'd like you to think about going forward that I think will help you. Bear with me here. Okay. There's really 3 things that I would encourage you to do, think about when it comes to violent extremism, and think about in your own life. All right? Here they are. 1, get surrounded on purpose. Meet people where they are. All right? Whatever your problems are in life that you face, whether it's violent extremism, national security, or your own school, the more you can get local, the more you can connect with people on a local level, bottom up, kind of meet them where they are, understand what's going on with them, and make that part of your problem, the more successful you will be. I guarantee it. Try it. It's really easy to project our own biases on things. We did it for a decade in the war, and it failed. So try to find ways to connect and listen and make those connections locally. You'll be amazed at what it will do for you. I spent 23 years as a Green Beret doing it. I promise you, I talked my way out of more gunfights than I shot my way out of. Okay? The second one is build your own tribes. You guys are connected today more than ever. I mean, you're natives in this digital world, and that's fantastic. But developing your own way to build tribes to solve problems. You've also inherited some of the most complex problems history's ever known, including this one. And the only way you're going to be able to tackle it, I think, is to build unlikely tribes of people around the world. So continue to refine that. It's a great skill set that I encourage you to do. And finally, this one is my most favorite. Learn how to tell your story. Part of the problem with the war on terror and violent extremism is no one really knows where we're coming from here. If you go into a lot of these communities I talked about, they really do believe we're attacking Islam. They really do believe that's what we're bent on doing. And I spent a lot of time in these villages. Learn to tell stories that matter. Learn to communicate in a way that's transparent and resonates with people and ring true. I told you guys my story in the beginning to make a connection. And it works. If you can tell your own personal story, whether you're going for a job interview, whether you're trying out for something, whatever it is, learn to tell your story. Learn to communicate your points through story, and it will stick with people. And it's something we're going to have to learn to do as a nation if we're going to get people to stand up against violent extremists. Okay, I'm going to stop there and see if we have any questions for the last 10 minutes or so. Sir?
Do you speak the languages of the countries you're going to?
We try to. I speak, I spent years studying Spanish because before 9/11 I worked in Central and South America. And then when we started moving over to Afghanistan, I started working on some Pashto and Dari. But it's hard because, that's 3 languages, But yes, as a rule, we try to immerse in the language as much as we can. We have language labs in our units, and we actually train in language. If we teach guys how to defend their village, we do it all in Pashto. Sir?
How did you get into the field that you're in now? Where you're
I ask myself that every day. That's a good question. It's funny. This whole approach that we did, believe it or not, was actually started, a couple of us just saw that we were losing. I was a major at the time, and we drew it out on a napkin. We drew out what we should be doing, and we took it to our general, and we were like, "Hey, sir, we're losing. Can we do this?" And he was like, "Yeah, let's try it." And it took off. And the next thing you know, Senator McCain and Senator Lieberman were coming out to see it. Congress funded it. General Petraeus was calling it a game changer. And so I kind of fell into it. I mean, that's been the story of my life. It's just, I'd love to sit here and say, "Oh, I'm an expert, it's all about design." It's not. I just kept running the miles. And I kept going out to these rough places. And listening to people at a local level. I think the way that you really get where you want to get in life, all this stuff you see in Hollywood's not true. You got to run the miles. You got to roll your sleeves and you got to get scuffed up. And you got to get in there and see things locally, how people see them. And if they know you're carrying the water for them and you're honest and transparent and representing them, you can get a ton done. And I think that's why people bring me in, because they know I'm going to call it like I see it. If the emperor doesn't have any clothes, I'm going to tell him I don't care. And that's what they want me to do. So I guess that's how I got there. Sir?
What country were you most successful in?
I wish it was Afghanistan, but unfortunately we shut that program down. Some of you have probably been seeing what's going on in Afghanistan. We're pulling out, and unfortunately we're going to be right back in there in about 2 to 3 years. So I think we were most successful in Afghanistan as far as getting the program going. If I were going to say one country represents success with our work over time, it was Colombia. Because that's been like a 40-year program where we've just gone in and out of Colombia nonstop and worked with them to help them push back against the FARC and the ELN guerrillas, and I think it's been very successful. If you go to Colombia today, it is a radically different country than where it was my first time there in the 90s. I mean, you could not leave the Quartel without getting shot at. You just couldn't. And now, I would take my family there. So, I mean, I hold that up as a success. But I attribute that more to the Colombian people than us, but I do think we had a hand in it. Sir?
Why would you hear more about Islamic extremism and not extremism of other religions?
I mean, it's a fair question. From a soldier's perspective, I look at the threat, right? I mean, I look at what poses the greatest threat because we have a finite number of resources and time and assets to deal with those threats. I mean, especially now with sequestration. Our guys are deployed unbelievable amounts. So we don't have the time to focus on every extremist out there. We have to weigh our choices. And I found that in the military, especially special operations, you've got to have a science to how you apply your time. And if you know, I can show you on a whiteboard that we can list all the different extremist groups. We can list the events that have occurred and what's underway, and it's compelling. You don't even have to be an analyst to see it. You know, and so when you compare will, capacity, and what's underway, those three are your metrics. It's hands down. You know, it doesn't mean you're not looking at the other extremist groups. There are folks that are, but notice I said it poses the greatest threat to the nation. I mean, there's others out there, but none that I think have the will and capacity to do what Islamist violence is. But a great question, and something you shouldn't take your eye off of, because you know you're sitting here worried about A, B, and C, and Q comes up and kicks you in the pants, right? So you want to make sure that you always keep an eye on your 6. So that's a great question. I wish more people in DC know like that. You want to come to DC? Sure.
How long do you think it's going to take our government to push down the Islamic terrorist group down so it won't be our highest priority jurisdiction?
I don't think our government will ever push it down. I think that's the problem. And unfortunately, I couldn't get into that with you today, but what we're doing top down, you know, by saying, hey, I'm from the U.S., I like it so far. It doesn't work. It does not work. It does not push them down. The more you hit them like that, with drone strikes and carriers and destroyers, you actually inflame the narrative. We've got to come from the bottom. There are hundreds of thousands of locals who do not want these people in their villages. They don't. They will push back. But we've got to get in there, create the coercive space for them to do that, and I'd say that's going to take 25 years. Sure.
Better if we like attack all of like I don't know like with ground troops or like if we would attack, I'd be better with ground troops or air.
So let me just tell you, as a guy who's seen more combat than I ever want to see again, I've seen more up close and personal. My son is going into the Army. He wants to be a Green Beret. I get that question a lot, and here's my take on it. We always retain the option as a nation to defend our way of life and our people. And total war is something we have done, right? World War I, World War II, we have gone and embarked on literally total war, where you attrit, you literally lay waste to that which is in front of you. And you bend the will of the people to yours. It is an option. It is the worst possible option we could ever use. It is an option. And I would submit to you that if there ever was a catalyst event in this country that was bad enough, that might happen. But I can just tell you, having seen combat up close and personal, our nation does not have the stomach for that. And it's a good thing. However, we have to be very careful of these airstrikes and drone strikes. Just because you can't see it, don't mean people ain't dying. Right? Just because you're not having to watch it on CNN, people are still dying. And guess the people who are dying are? They're those clan societies. Right? The violent extremists embed in them like a tick and a shaggy dog. They dig in. And so when you drop a bomb, you might kill that violent extremist, but guess who else you kill? The family that he just moved in on. What do you think Honor's going to do about that? What is Feud going to do about that? And they just point to it and say, see, told you Islam's under attack. Look what they just did to your wife. Are you going to take that? We should pay more attention to the attack on the Pakistani school in Peshawar than we should to the attack on the media in France. Because those tribes actually went after the children of soldiers who were operating in the tribal areas of Pakistan. Tribal vengeance knows no boundaries and no rules. So, again, the drone strikes and the raids are not, they don't get it done. You got to do some of that, but you need to do it in the broader context of helping locals push back. Ma'am.
Do you see, we're very much a war-driven economy. Do you see anything in DC that's pushing towards your point of view as opposed to enforcing the drone strikes or being more violent in our attempt?
Yeah.
Do you see DC is changing?
And that's a great
DC
question.
is very-
You know, DC is well, I love putting that place in my rearview mirror. I really do, because I think that unfortunately that does drive the decision making there. There has been no palpable change yet. I am hoping that when my book comes out and that we keep pushing and we keep making this noise, I'm trying to get in the media as much as I can to say this, to talk about this, because the reality is most of the folks who have the common sense to see what's going on locally are local working. They don't have the voice or the platform to say what's, hey, this is the way. So, you know, a few of us are out there trying to be that platform. We're seeing some movement, there are some champions, but we have a way to go. It will be your generation that changes it, I guarantee it. We're going to start the conversation, you guys are going to have to finish it. Or our kids are going to read it.
Yeah, Congressman Charlie Wilson, probably the best expert in Afghanistan. I mean, basically summed it up, we made it, they did not. Because the only way that the Saudis found is economic aid, domestic economic. You mentioned Colombia, well, they made it, their economy, but also capital. What do you think of Charlie Wilson's idea that we should really be spending our money on schools, clean water, economic aid? And that's a little bit of a sound.
That's a great question. Actually, Charlie Wilson's War, if you guys have ever seen it, Tom Hanks plays Congressman Charlie Wilson, and Julia Roberts plays Joanne Herring, the Texas heiress who they worked together to bring aid, the Stinger missiles to Afghanistan, to the Mujahideen in the 80s. I actually interviewed Joanne, and actually the real Joanne, and we talked about this. And one of the things that I don't disagree with you on the economic aid, here's the problem. For 10 years in Afghanistan, what we tried to do was unload billions of dollars in economic aid. Hey, you guys are really poor. It looks like you need a school. You guys don't have enough water, so we'll just put a well here. And what we failed to do was understand those local dynamics and that economic development doesn't work that way there. There is a bottom-up component to economic development that is run by the clan, the tribe, the community, and that has been degraded. So if we're going to do this, it's going to have to be microeconomic development. It's going to be much more incremental. It's going to have to be bottom-up, and it's going to take much longer. But it is essential. And what we found, for example, a lot of these villages, they don't know how to farm. You would think Afghanistan knows how to farm. I mean, 80% of the country is agricultural. But all of the people moved out of the rural areas during the Soviet occupation and lived in refugee camps. So the farming capacity is gone. So we had to show them actually how to farm like an extension agent. Hey, don't kill the earthworms with your thumb. They're good for the soil. You know, they were really doing that. And anybody who farms knows that's crazy. But that's where we are. So it's almost a restoration of civil society at a local level, not this big A top-down development stuff. Doesn't work there.
Last question.
Man.
Do you think that the revenge of the clans is a biggest issue in this against the
Yes. No, I do, because we're all talking about Islam versus Christianity, and I think that's exactly what the violent extremists want us talking about. Look, they want us drawn in. Osama bin Laden, right after 9/11, bragged on a videotape that very few people saw that said, all I have to do is take 2 of my Al-Qaeda fighters, put them in the point farthest in the east, raise the black flag of Al-Qaeda, and all the American generals will come. And all they have to do that is mobilize clan honor, because it's damaged. It's real easy to get these young men and women spun up the same way you can spin up a Crip or a Blood in East LA. It's the same thing, and that's what they're doing. That is the secret, and that's why we have to get local and take that terrain away from them and re-empower local pragmatic actors who live there to take their communities back. It's the only way. And it's going to be a long slog, and we're going to need you to help lead it.